All right, live. Oh, Eric Dreyer making it in just as we go live under the wire. Um,
Okay.
it is June 2022. Here we are again. And this month we're welcoming Charles Edge as our focal point, our guest. And Charles, I haven't spoken to you directly in quite some time. And just before we went live, we were talking about travel and all the things. And I used to see you at every conference, like all the conferences.
Yeah, 3 or 4 times a year at least, right?
Yeah. And
We even ran into each other in an airport in Paris, was it?
I think that's right. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, like way back in the day, I remember some of your trips to New York. We would connect and have lunch or whatever. Um, but like, I don't know if you realize how inspiring you are in a lot of ways. And like when I think of you, I just think of like output, content output. You're always doing something, books and source code and whatever. So I think if we're going to rewind this way back, just before we started recording now, you mentioned you worked for Accenture, which I don't remember that. But I remember when we met, which was probably at Macworld, like way back in the day.
Yeah. I'm
Probably,
pretty sure it was a Macworld.
probably. But I think maybe at that point you had already started 318, right?
Yeah, that was 2000 that we started that. So, I was stationed, if you will, at when I was at Accenture in LA, and then they were like, "Oh, we want you to move somewhere else." And I was like, "I kind of like it here." So, I stayed and, until my kid was born, and then I moved to Minnesota. But yeah, that was a great era in LA too, I think, you know. It wasn't quite as jam packed as it is now.
Hmm. Okay. I didn't know that. Um, so yeah, I think I've always thought of you as a Minnesotan.
Oh yeah, I was in LA from 90 the end of 98 to 14 years ago because my kid just turned 14.
Hmm. Yeah, that's funny. That's how we mark the passage of time. I moved into the house I'm in when my older daughter was born, so like we know exactly like 2 weeks after she was born was the closing date. So it's like, how long we been here? Oh, how old is? Yeah, okay, right. So we can measure time that way, which is really funny. Um, and then 318 ran its course. Whatever happened, you left, you did your thing, and then was it Jamf directly after that?
Yep. Yeah. I went to be a, I guess, product manager at Jamf and built what's now called Jamf Now team. And that was I had wanted to build an MDM before that. And so then when I got the call to do that, I was like, well, Apple won't give me access. At the time, the documentation for the API, the MDM API was still closed.
That's right.
So I was like, well, now I can do it, just not on my own. So yeah.
Right, that's right. I remember those days. You had to be like an MDM vendor to have access to that documentation, which
Yeah, I think they gave it to maybe 2 or 3 large enterprises that wanted to build their own. And that was pretty much it. You had to
yeah.
have one of those $100,000 accounts or up in order to kind of qualify for that, to even have the conversation, because it was still very, and I totally understand why. I don't think I did when I started doing the whole thing, but at the time there weren't as many controls maybe behind who could install enrollment certificates and how that whole SCEP interaction happened. And
Yep.
so it was fairly dangerous in the wrong hands. Because I don't know if you remember, there were like websites that had installed this profile that would then route all of your traffic through their servers or something. There were some icky things in those early days, but it's now a super mature protocol, obviously. So
Yeah, yeah. I think the thing you're referring to is maybe a little outside MDM that was like the enterprise certificate that you could just install on your own. Didn't require MDM, right? It was
Yeah, it's
just
just profiles at that
yeah,
point. Yeah.
yeah,
But I did see a couple of, I wouldn't call them malware, but malware-ish services where people would have people enroll.
one,
And, that was before you saw all the profiles are in the system preference pane. So,
yeah.
it, it just needed to mature a little bit. It was way better than imaging a whole bunch of devices in iTunes, though, right?
Yes,
So,
yes. Um, so what you were talking about with Jamf now, that started off as Bushel, right? That
yeah.
was Bushel. So is that still a product at Jamf?
Oh,
Not
yeah.
Bushel, but Jamf now, is it? Oh, I
Mhm.
didn't know
Yeah, I think as for publicly available information, and I don't work at Champ anymore, so I don't know anything but what's publicly announced. But it sounded like in the last shareholder meeting that there were over 30,000 customers of that product. So you
that. Oh,
know,
wow.
yeah, and
That's sort of like, hey, you're a team of 50 or under or something like that. That's what that
oh,
targeted at, or 10
yep.
or I don't know what it is.
Yeah, there were customers with over 1,000 devices. I think it was more anyone who that workflow applied to, because the whole goal was to take that experience and just have it a one-click setup. And a lot of tools kind of fast followed or were probably working on it while we were working on it. So I don't want to take
Yes.
anything away from them in that regard, but there were a few others. I mean, I think a week before we released, VMware released a tool, and we had actually planned on using a similar name, or a week before we rebranded, they released a similar tool. And I think we were planning on using a similar name and had to change it real quick. So oops.
Yeah, okay, that's okay. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
that's an interesting point of like, hey, we want this thing to be one click. That should be the goal of like everything. We want it to be as
Yeah.
easy, one click.
If
That
only everyone was the same, you know?
or yeah, not to say it couldn't be modified or like ask you questions along the way, but we
I
definitely
still think it's easy to use. I mean, at our company now, that's what we use, just because I know it pretty decently,
sure,
compared to others.
of course,
And we have very easy needs compared to some environments, but yeah.
and still attend shareholder meetings. So,
Yeah.
you're still in. Um, okay, so I think you just gave me a great segue into, you said at our company now.
Hmm.
Talk about that, because now I know you left Jamf, and then things for me got really fuzzy on what you do. Is this bootstrappers?
Yeah, so I left to help, um, I would say invest in in not small always, but in startups. So you could think of us as an angel, a VC, a whatever. But we deploy capital to companies who need funding, and some of that, for me at least, is trying to prove that thesis. I mean, there are people who've been professionally doing this their entire lives at places like Y Combinator that are so much better. So I don't feel like I should give any, you know, tips or tricks on that. But yeah, we invest in companies, and then we also have, I would say, an arm of the shop that is a venture studio, which means we also build software. So I
Oh,
would say for the past 7 or 8 months, I've been heads down in Swift, filing patents and preparing to take a new product to market.
wow, beautiful, beautiful. So, um, you mentioned like Y Combinator and some of these other ones, and I don't know if like comparing it is the right thing, rather than just saying like, well, they do it differently or have a different focus or something. Like, is there a specific or particular focus to bootstrappers? Like, do you help like Minnesota startups or Mac?
Yeah,
Though, is there a specific thing to bootstrappers that makes it different than all of these other
yeah,
VC?
I would say macroeconomic shifts change your focus. So when we started, it was trying to focus on Minnesota startups, and over time, anything Apple oriented, because we just have the subject matter knowledge to understand the products. has become a slightly bigger shift. Chip, who was a co-founder of Jamf, is also there, as is Amy, who, if you saw any of the Jamf tweets or social media from yesterday, she was one of the first 5 employees. So
Hmm.
we are, always looking for other companies to invest in and hot new products. I do find that it's in the name, bootstrappers. We do prefer companies who are revenue positive, revenue generating. I can't tell you how many startups I talk to who are just living on the venture capital goodwill, maybe. And macroeconomic times are going to be driving all of those valuations down in the next year, because they kind of follow the trend of the stock market in a way. Most VCs benchmark startups based on public market data. So
Okay.
so
Very.
we'll see how all that goes. Most funds, it takes 3 to 5 years to net any reasonable return. So
And you mentioned you're in this arm of the company that's developing some software.
yeah, I act as the CTO, so I would say I technically validate, although I do have backgrounds in sales and marketing, so I do help with some go-to-market activities and things of that nature. But I've tried to block off as much as my calendar as possible for the past few months and just code. And to be perfectly honest, I'm so much happier doing that than, I like the last 2 days we spent 6 months writing Swift packages and don't throw up in your mouth, but JavaScript frameworks. And just the last week, I started building the GUIs, and it like Lego pieces, they're just snapping together. And I don't think I've been this happy in a long time. So it's fun to watch. There was always a plan to start putting the Lego pieces together, but then I was like, let me open up Sketch and Keynote and a few different wireframing tools. And for the web interface, I did most of it in Numbers of all things. But let me do the UX piece. And then once I've got that UX piece, we just start dropping things on, and it starts looking pretty, because before it was all white background with black text. So it's fun.
And so then if you can dive into that a little bit more, is this, I guess first question is this one of many products or pieces of software where you're ready to release, or you can't say, or yes, it's
Uh, so I've got 3
oh wow.
that are at different stages of development. One I don't think will make any money. So let's call it a passion project, but it should exist. So I'll probably just open source the entire code and put it on the App Store and say, if you like what's on the App Store, use it. And if you don't like what's on the App Store, use the open source thing. I've got another one that's now nearing probably the 85% mark. And that's where I started, designing the GUIs. And there are other developers who are helping me now. Originally, it was just me, and now there's a few others. And then there's another one that's just forming in my mind, and I'm poking around at APIs. So a lot of the projects that show up on my GitHub are me like poking around at things, and not, you could almost call it the island of misfit toys. Like, oh, I poked around at this and it didn't let me do what I wanted. So I just, decided to come back to it in a year and see if insert vendors APIs allow me to do what I want,
Yeah, and that's a valid reason to open source things as any, right? Like, here's example code that does this thing. Um,
I wish I could make a fork of all of GitHub and just call it the GitHub of Misfit Toys, and just like, here's all these abandoned projects. And if someone figures out a way to make it a reality, like, these are things that should exist, but they can't just yet for whatever reason.
Yeah. So I'll hold my other question around your software and come back to it, because you just gave me yet another opportunity in terms of, you mentioned GitHub and open sourcing some things. There is a Bootstrappers GitHub repo, Bootstrappers MN, and it has been busy. It's been getting, or you and your team have been busy getting some things in there. Can you talk about those?
Uh, I don't actually know what is on the
Ah,
Bootstrappers GitHub. That's interesting. Hopefully we haven't actually clicked the public button on anything that we weren't supposed to.
well, okay, I lied. I'm looking at some repos here. There are some on, there's one in particular on Bootstrappers, and then as is typical, there's a bunch on your personal
Right.
that have been
Yeah.
updated fairly recently, and you're sharing this
Yeah.
with, so
I'm never sure where I should put them. Some I should put, it's like if I'm working on it at 2 a.m., you know, it doesn't matter where it goes. I would say the one that we just posted to Bootstrappers, we haven't built a UI for it, or at least we haven't divorced the UI from the rest of the UI of our other tools. But
right.
it's an interactive defaults walker, so you can just open it, enter a search string, and it works kind of like FS Events or FS Eventor used to work. If you remember that old tool, where if you have a search string in, it just shows you what shows up with a predicate or a prefix in there. So I thought that was really useful for, you're installing a package and you want to see what that package is putting in the defaults domains across the board, because some packages don't stay within their own defaults domains, and core data will allow you to write anywhere practically. There's not a permission model like an ACL type model for core data. So in that regard, but yeah, so that's maybe we'll have to build a UI for it so it's actually useful to someone, because right now it's just Swift packages.
Yeah, yeah. That's cool. That's good. And then
Something went wrong. Try again in a few seconds.
oh no, something went wrong.
I don't know.
Sorry, Alexa.
Yeah,
Whoever.
there's always something talking. I think that was yeah, I'm not sure which one that was.
And then
Eric's shaking his head.
I know from your personal GitHub, there's touch encrypted JSON, dev mode curl,
Yeah,
anything.
dev mode curl, I think I'm going to release that on the App Store. Just a free one, and then say, here's the, because I do have a more recent version that does, it has like a web view using Safari Kit to grab OAuth tokens. So let me grab an OAuth token and then just send arbitrary curl commands. And I added persistence and a couple other things to it. Um, so, so your last curl will survive across a restart of the app. But yeah, that like that, I find that when you're working on things like Postman has just gotten really complex these days.
Mhm.
So I just wanted a super easy that I can invoke within my app. So that was actually built to drag into another app and then, make a view controller for it and see. Um, so you can enable a dev mode or something extra in your app for while you're writing things, and then strip it out before it goes up to the App Store, or leave it in when it goes up to the App Store according to what it is. But we spend so much time writing tools to write tools that aren't IDEs, especially in a very microservice oriented world. Like, and a bunch of this stuff, there's stuff out there for. So like, maybe you're using Heroku for something, and there's tons of stuff out there for how to do your build trains in Heroku. But every environment's different. So for us, we've got so much Swift that most of the stuff out there doesn't work for what we're doing, if that makes sense.
Yeah. How do you feel about Swift? You enjoying
I
it?
love Swift. Yeah. I mean, Swift UI, let's, I find it to be very easy to give me all kinds of options. And then if I can't then I can always use Swift to figure out how to make a UI for something. But it's almost like a declarative language in a way. So I like the ability to kind of have a set of functional code that then I make object oriented by how I tell it all to interact, if that makes sense. So yeah, I mean, so Rennick has been trying to talk me into becoming a Go person, which I'm like, I'm sorry, I just don't have a pencil thin mustache, and the hipster vibe is not working here. But and then someone told me my Swift was Pythonic, which I initially was offended by, but then I was like, but that makes sense because I spend way more time there than there.
Yeah, that probably makes sense. I don't know. I think of Swift and Go as sort of like two separate tools that you deploy for sort of different kinds of things.
Oh
And
yeah. Even though you can put Swift up as like a microservice on AWS, I wouldn't, you know. But I think there you're also kind of getting into people trying to pull you in different directions career-wise. So if someone's trying to pull you in the Go direction, that's, you're talking about mostly server, at least in my experience, mostly server side controllers. And if you're talking about Swift, it's mostly client side. I still like kind of bouncing between them, so
yeah. And at WDC, what is it, a week ago now, I guess, there were a mention or two of Vapor, which is the server side Swift framework. So I don't know, like you can run Swift on Linux already. Maybe Apple's edging in that direction a little bit.
I wouldn't mind it. I mean, as a developer, if I build something in Swift and then I need to go to JavaScript, which, a lot of the backends are built there, or Go, or Laravel, or, there's a bunch, but there's a lot of infrastructure, and a lot of infrastructure is code, and a lot of domain expertise in different areas that I don't really maybe want to have to go learn if I'm just trying to build an app that does a thing, So mentioning Heroku as an example, like I don't, getting a certificate on Heroku and doing all the different things, like if Apple just had in Xcode a service that I could consume, or Auth0 as an example. If I want to, get all the social logins for free by dragging in an SDK, I don't want to have to be paying another vendor hundreds of dollars and then also be confined to what they have in their SDK,
Right.
So I would certainly love it. And it might not work great for cross-platform apps, but I don't enjoy writing code for Windows, although I would say Windows 11, it's much, much, much better. So I don't mind staying in that Apple ecosystem in that regard.
I used to do some Windows development way, way back in the day, and I think I had a chance to look at some of like the .NET API and some of the
Anders Heilberg.
yeah, and some of
Thank
the
you,
more
Anders.
and some of the more contemporary Windows APIs, and I'm like, wow, I don't think this changed from 20 years
Well,
ago.
it's literally the same guy. I mean, I mean, not to take anything away from the other hundreds of thousands of people who are with him, but he, that even TypeScript, where he's kind of leaning into more of a JavaScript kind of direction, it's all still the same architect,
It just fascinates me how much emphasis Microsoft puts on backward compatibility, where Apple is very much like, chuck it overboard, like we're done. Like, this
Right.
thing's not going to work anymore. Like, sorry everybody. And
Economies of scale to some degree on the desktop platforms, at least,
yeah, so I think you have largely focused on the Apple platform for a very long time. How do you feel about development on the platform or platforms, if you include iOS and iPadOS, like over time? Has it been getting better, easier, faster?
All of the above. I mean, I feel like the people who write both the APIs and the languages are more thoughtful about how they do it. And, back in the 80s, when you needed to buy a Lisa to develop for the 1984 Mac,
Right.
it maybe couldn't have ever been like they couldn't know what we were going to be going through later. It had to evolve necessarily. But I feel like, the documentation isn't where I'd like it to be. Mentioning half the abandoned projects, I have one to upload where I'm trying to get to this. They don't call it the screen time API, but there's an API that exposes some of the screen time data now. And having teenagers, that's something I was very interested in
Huh.
poking at. But it wasn't documented very well, but it's a new API and that happens. So uh but I would say by and large, we can see it with some of the profile documentation being like there's a YAML instance now, and I could consume that with a service and sync a database up to it.
Yeah.
So the tools that you get for free to do things, writing extensions, I think, versus trying to write binaries
Mm,
before is so much easier. And I think the end user benefits so much because, as an example, when I add an extension into an app, I then have to ask for an entitlement for this, that, and the other, whatever it is I'm trying to get at. And they just added the computer name, and there's a reason they did that. There was a problem, and who knows, like, but but I feel like I best and I can better understand today than ever before what the intent of the people who write the tools that I then consume are what their intent is for how they're used. And that's super important, because if you want to future proof your code, you want to be writing it how they intend for it to be used. That way
yes.
they don't introduce a breaking change randomly because they're like, well, we never intended that. Like, you weren't supposed to
Well,
do that,
I guess your API is how people use it, not like what you intended, right? Because once you expose something, you'll just find people using your API in all sorts of unexpected ways.
But now we have to have like the extensions framework as an example. There's a WatchOS app up on my GitHub, and you have to drag the watch entitlement in, and there's a lot of protection around the way that the end user is the way that it's exchanging data in a very thoughtful way. So
Yeah, I think to put a finer point on it, when you mention like writing extensions, it's better for the end user. It's generally safer and more secure, and there are these security boundaries that come along with that. So that's a big part of the direction Apple has been moving and continues to move. So I think that's really good to see.
it can make for a much more complicated scenario when you have a large atomic operation you're trying to complete, and you're trying to hit this, that, and the other, and on first use you might prompt the user 5 times for entitlements. So you know
Yeah, some of those things aren't great, but I think we're gonna come back and touch on some of those things uh, later on, hopefully when we're talking about WDC and some of the newer announcements. But before we leave Bootstrappers entirely, I wanted to ask one last question about some of the software you're building. Um, if you can, who's the target audience? Like you're this VC and you're building software. Like why? Who are you building it for?
yeah
Is it the people you're funding and investing in, or is it just like a no, hey, we're just selling this thing to a wide
Yeah,
variety.
I don't think I would invest in nor build software for startups, to be perfectly honest. Like, you're building stuff for people that don't have the money to pay for it anyways. Like, it's just the hard part about building enterprise software is the barrier of entry. You have to have SOC 2 compliance, and I hear a pitch maybe at least once every other week from a startup who's like, "We're going after enterprise customers," and maybe they worked at an enterprise and they saw a need, but they don't understand kind of those barriers, the SOC 2, the legal requirements. Like, can you
Do
sustain $10,000 legal reviews for every single customer you close? Because that's what you're going to be looking at. Those, huh?
do you help them through that then?
I mean, I try to.
Like if this were Shark Tank, right? They'd be buying some of your time or someone that bootstrapper's time to help answer those questions and make those things clear.
Yeah, I find a lot of startups pretend that they want advice in order to get you to cut them a check, and they really don't. And that's, or let me rephrase that. They just don't have time because they're trying to move at breakneck speeds, to be very, forgiving about that. They've just got so many things going on. They're just trying to get, deals closed or software out the door. And, they don't need some old guy with gray in his beard telling them what to do. you
If they
know
want money, they do.
Yeah, well, once they cash the check, it's but yeah, we do counsel a lot, and I would say Chip has so much better guidance than I do for customers, or for startups. So, that's his forte more than mine. Probably am best talking about technical architectures at this point,
Sure.
because when you talk to someone who's like, yeah, we have free hosting basically because we're using Heroku, you're like, yeah, it's free until it's $100,000 a month. Like,
Right.
there's no middle ground there, or AWS, or because when we started, Ed, it was, you had to build a data center, and it was 15, 20, $30,000 to set up, a web app, and back then
Doing
they
it
didn't
right.
call it SaaS, but now it's like, open a quick Heroku account or Firebase or insert thing here. And you can, in fact, I've talked to people who are daisy chaining services to get to stay within the free tier of GCP and Firebase and
It's
Heroku.
chaos engineering. It's just chaos engineering. That's all. Like spreading
Right.
multi-cloud.
Yeah, but anyone whose value proposition is we're cheaper than the market leader, you're like, well, there's a reason that the market leader is more expensive, because they have a cost structure that includes management layers and compliance. And because the second you get SOC 2 compliant, now you need to get, whether it's FIPS or FedRAMP or ISO, it's a never ending game, until you have a dozen people on staff, and that's their whole job, is compliance. So
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, exactly. So so we're not going to find out who this software is for, which is fine. I wasn't sure.
anybody that wants to use it, I will say
Anyone
this.
who wants to pay for it.
Yeah, I don't think almost any startup, unless they're planning on being acquired by a large entity who's already got the compliance, should probably start at that enterprise scale. And it is really hard to talk to small business. Like,
Mhm.
in the marketing motions, the go-to-market strategies, if you think about it, think of all the small business owners you use, and what single place do they all go to consume something? And the answer is none, because they have a different industry that they're in. So then you're marketing horizontally or laterally or vertically. And vertical marketing, you basically have the exact same spend replicated across different channels. So it's it's hard, but I probably most believe in freemium products at this point. Mentioned Y Combinator, Paul Graham's so much smarter than me, and this is owed to him. But free for up to X, and then X amount a month beyond that. So I I like trying to design software to do complicated the stuff I'm working on is cryptography related. But if I can design software to do very complicated procedures in a way that my parents can use or
Right.
people who aren't as technical, then I feel like I'm doing a better job. Uh, you know, so
Yeah. Well, that's the dream, right? And that's why I think everyone is listening and is on this call is because we love Apple, and that's one thing that they were great at, right? Making all this complexity, sort of like hiding it away and
like
make
passkeys, holy buckets. Like let's take this whole FIDO2 thing and
yeah,
just simplify it into a term, basically, you know?
yeah. I love the idea, and I think it's going to be great for consumers.
Hmm.
I think for most businesses, the reliance on keychain is a deal breaker. And it makes sense. I'm glad Apple did it, and I think that's the right move for them, but you're not gonna see the adoption in business because it just
You know, I feel like with something like passkeys, it can benefit both.
yeah.
Um, but one of my biggest security concerns is the fact that, like, when was the last time you changed your keychain password?
Oh, yeah, like, never.
I mean, I have to change what my Okta password every 3 months, but I haven't changed my keychain password since I bought my last computer. Luckily, I burn through computers
I
every
was
6
just
months,
gonna
but
say, no,
you
I
know,
turn over
I
computers.
I was talking to one guy the other day and he said it's been 6 years. And I'm like, yeah,
Well, but I guess,
that's
that's also helped by, um, we're seeing now more storage in the secure enclave, so we're getting more things backed by the secure enclave that
well, we're
you
seeing there's actually a great talk. I assume it'll be great coming up at Objective by the Sea about what is stored in the secure enclave. And I've definitely poked around at this a lot. And all the secure enclave does is give me an ECC key as a software developer. That's it. There's nothing like I'm not actually putting my secrets in the secure enclave. I'm just encrypting them using that key, you know? And to me, that, um, you know, but my internet passwords, I need to touch my fingerprint for Safari to show me my internet passwords, but it's still, I don't know.
yeah.
To me, this is one of the bigger secrets at rest. To me, is one of the biggest challenges. And let's not forget, we're coming into an era where a nation state may have 50 quantum computers
Yeah.
at universities, just like the NCSA or the supercomputer kind of cluster of universities that the United States had in the 70s. But now with quantum computers, and so you can say, well, it would take a million years to decrypt that. And you're like, what if I put an agent trying to decrypt it under the hood that no one knew about on a million devices and 20 quantum computers? And by the way, there's a username and a password and a key because passwordless is really just key, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
so I can derive a private key from a public key if I have enough CPU resources. And so what we've done as a security industry is we've built this paradigm ever since RSA, Rivest, and which I truly believe in PKI, but we've built this paradigm where we're just trying to outrun key lengths for processing power. So Moore's law is going like this, and key lengths have to go like that in order for it to take, you know. But anyways, I'm babbling. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, we're saying we're replacing passwords, but it's still a password. It just happens to be a really, really, really long string of numbers, right? Like, that's your password now. You don't know it. You probably can't memorize it. I mean, some people can, right? Some people memorize, 200 digits of pi or something like that. Like, but you're not going to remember all of them for each website that you pair with, and the phishing resistance of FIDO2 and passkeys is really fantastic. So I think, again, particularly for consumers, I think this is a really great thing to get people used to and in the habit of. And I have the family plan for 1Password, and I'm the only one that uses it because I can't get my family to, start using it, or they started using it, and then, like, 2 weeks later, they're like, what was my password for this? I'm like, all right, I'll help you recover it. And then 2 weeks later, like, I can't remember the password for this. Like, oh no. It's like it's tough. I get it. I get it. Like, but just sort of like back to the passkeys and use in enterprise. I think most enterprises will just continue to use hardware security keys, which, give you a lot of that benefit and do all the same things. And that's where we're going to be with those.
Yeah, if I'm a director at a company and I've been spending $50 a user on FIDO tokens, whether it's a YubiKey or insert name here, I'm definitely interested, I would say, in how I can get that same level of security without it. And yeah, I could, some services can use like the Salesforce Authenticator or the Microsoft Authenticator app, which are mostly just FIDO anyways. But, yeah, I'm super interested. I would say for, enterprise adoption, we would need a new feature. So if anyone feels like backing this up by filing it again, we need to be able to make them non-exportable.
Yes.
Like in the video when they showed the user sharing their passkey, I'm like, like I know what's going on under the hood there, and it's gross.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And I think that goes for a lot of features that get announced at WDC, right? Like this group in particular and Mac admins everywhere kind of look at it and say like, oh my God, this is amazing. How do we manage it? Like that's the trick. And like that thoughtfulness isn't always there from Apple up front. They may eventually get around to it, but the how do we manage this cool new thing is tough.
I thought it was a pretty thoughtful. I mean, just watching him walk through the presentation, he just nailed it.
Great.
But also when I looked at the GUI screens and installed betas, I'm just like, yeah, this is a good implementation. This is a good first stab at FIDO 2, and this team should be proud of their work.
Absolutely.
And I saw in the newspaper, Apple moving the world to passwordless. And I'm like, what you mean is Apple, Google, and Microsoft moving the world to passwordless because they all agreed to adopt FIDO 2. Like, but Apple had their developer conference first and they had the code ready to go and they shipped that. And hopefully they get all the goodwill that the technical media can give them for it.
Yeah, agreed. So earlier when we were talking about some development, you mentioned requiring a Lisa to develop for, the new Mac. And, I think among Mac admins that I know, there's definitely this affinity for older machines. I definitely have that. I have, 2 Commodore 64s downstairs.
Those were great machines.
Yeah, I have an old Mac SE, and like I have a bunch of, sort of older hardware that I can't part with. But I still love reading about it, and I don't know what that sort of low-level fascination is with older hardware, but that bug has bitten you as well. And
you could say that.
You're adding to your count of books that you've authored, and you have a book coming out talking about computer history.
Yeah, and it is not a small book. I when I was leaving Jamf, I was like, I'm going to spend part of my time writing this book because Dean asked me what I was going to do next, and he was like, "Boy, that's ambitious to write a book on the history of computers." And I was like, "Whatever."
Oh, come on,
you 2 years later, I am so lucky to have gotten. I mean, talk about being put in your place. Just being on the phone with, the guy who invented packet switching.
Yeah.
Or, some of these people that you interview, you're just like, wow, you wrote the first search engine, or you had, the list goes on. You invented the term WYSIWYG. You did this or what have you. So, hundreds of interviews. Later, the book's currently sitting at 1,800 pages. The rough draft's done, and I am 54% done with editing, because a book that size, your voice and your style change. As an example, in the earlier sections that I wrote, I included a lot more events that were like current events, and then it becomes a non-linear book, because you're like, okay, this chapter is the history of programming languages. So here's 109 pages of programming, pure text, no code. That's all in an appendix of programming languages. And the next thing, you're going back to those same previous years where you're like, okay, well, lambda calculus, kind of evolved in the late 1800s. So you're going through that same thing with how electronics emerged, or how, different ideas kind of formed. So, but yeah, the history of computers. That'll be easy. It's just a couple hundred pages.
I don't know. I'm psyched. I will be your first customer when it's released, because it's a topic that I definitely love, and I love digging into, and I love hearing stories that I already know. I love hearing stories that I already know told from a different perspective, and
Oh,
I love digging into a story that I think I know, and I go, "Oh, I learned something new out of this," right? Like, it just took me a slightly
yeah.
different
The
direction.
different perspective thing is really clutch, because 40, 50, 60 years later, it's really easy. Like I can't even remember what happened yesterday for the most part, but like as an example, I interviewed two people who were in the room, three now, people who were in the room when Steve Jobs was demoed the Xerox Alto
Mm,
and Star, I guess. And they all three have a different story. They all three say different things that occurred, and some are more forgiving, and some, throughout all of history.
yeah,
Uh, you read different accounts. Like I probably went through 6 books on Turing, and as the other thing is, as we learn more, history changes, because our understanding is deeper in some cases, um, or even our own ethoses have changed, and so where we might have taken a different perspective with like the history of, let's just say, Minnesota as an example. If you were asking, if you were telling someone the history of Minnesota in the 40s, you probably wouldn't have included anything that happened before Father Hennepin showed up in Minnesota. And that's definitely changed a lot, especially in the past few years. So
that's super interesting.
yeah, the super annoying thing, by the way, is like there's a section in the book on OS 10 server, which Eric Dreyer is mentioned in, by the way,
That
and
makes sense.
as are you, Ed, by the way.
Oh,
And in that section of the book, I just did the editing of that section, and I had to add the fact that it was gone.
well, I was gonna kinda ask that as, sort of a next question, and I know in a lot of talks that I've seen you do at conferences, that's a very common thing you do, where you talk about, like, "Hey, look, this thing happened, this thing, this thing, this thing. Check out the trajectory here. Like, this is where we're headed." So, did this book give you any of those revelations where, like, you've now amassed all of this information from whatever 50, 60 years worth of stuff? Did that give you some revelation of, like, here now I can more clearly see, like, this part of the industry, or something along those lines?
Well, no one's ever done this before that I hear from startups. I can now definitively say, yeah, they have. So there's, nothing is new. Everything's just an evolution, ever so slightly, of awesome things that came before it to some degree. Which is the awesome thing about posting a bunch of crap on GitHub, is you can innovate faster by evolving faster, unless the code is just that bad, which all of mine is, by the way. So but but yeah, I would say it's changed a few different investments that we almost made where I'm like, I don't think that's going to be a thing. And then there were a couple where we were not going to invest in a company. And I was like, I don't know, this is about to be a thing, but it's not going to be a thing for 3 to 5 years. So what's the horizon we want on an exit from this investment, you know?
Right.
And does the company have the runway to make it 5 years? Because I don't think this is going to be, you know, in the next year or two, but it's coming. So
Yeah, I think that is really, really an interesting perspective to look at it and use it for like investing in a company, because I'm sure we can all pull up a number of examples of like, oh, hey, there's this cool thing and it's really popular and it works great. And it's like, hey, someone else did this 10 years ago. And you look at it and like, yeah, they nailed it. They were just too early for everyone to either understand it or for it to
history
scale.
is littered with
It,
ArcNets and you know all those. But you know what's really wild. So if you take like search engines as an example, you know, they made millionaires out of people. Um, and then Web 2.0 search engines made billionaires out of people. So at each, I feel like we're coming into an era of decline for a year to three. But if the order of magnitude continues to go up the way it has, we may see some of the first, you know, I don't want to say trillionaires, but an order of magnitude higher for some of the people who survived that. Like, you
huh,
know, Google and Netflix barely survived the .com bubble bursting, but the survivors of that then went out, and Amazon, same. They had to recapitalize the whole company in a new and unique Bezos-esque way. But you look at the people who survived those, and they're always huge orders of magnitude higher. And you know, Netscape made Andreessen, as an example, a millionaire, but it was his smart investing in the next companies after that made him into a billionaire. So yeah, it's fun to watch. You know, I'm just some schmo writing about it. I wonder if I'll end up just becoming more and more academic, you know, and less over time, but that's fine too.
maybe, maybe. Um, I know we're closing in on an hour, and I know that's many people's limit of their attention span, but I have so much more I want to ask you. So I'm just gonna dive right into the next thing, and that's you're doing this thing at Bootstrappers, and you're writing Swift, um, and focusing on some Mac startups, but um, it feels like you've moved out of the realm of like the day-to-day Mac admin or
I am
focus.
still the Mac admin at my company,
Okay,
but we,
okay, so you're still doing it. That's great. I was just gonna say, like, the one place where you still have an anchor is you're part of the MacAdmin's podcast,
yeah, yeah.
and
And I still poker. You know, it's funny. I don't write as much on Cryptid as I used to, but I still spend about the same amount of time doing a lot of this stuff as I always did. It's just now on a podcast instead of writing a quick article when I find something or whatever,
yeah.
you know?
And don't get me wrong,
Um,
that's not a critique. Like, we all should feel free to like go explore our interests and passions, and it doesn't have to be Mac administration or anything like that. But I know you are still like a big part of the community and anchored in it, and um, so as part of the Mac Admins podcast, are you also involved in the Mac Admins Foundation now? That
I would not, I showed up to a few meetings,
okay?
and that was the limit of Bootstrappers was the first donator.
Oh,
So,
lovely.
and I would say that was the extent of my involvement. Watching the whole thing unfold over the past, because I'm in the Slack channel, year, it's been extremely thoughtful.
Yeah,
Um, and I, I would say the response has been rewarding. I would consider, and I don't know about how the board would actually feel. So I don't want to speak for anyone, but I would say the response has been uh, commensurate to the amount of consideration that went into the development of the foundation.
Well, I don't think I know everyone involved, but the people I do know, it's a considerate group, so I have no other expectations. But do you know the group? It's Tom Bridge, uh, Emily Kostlik, Rich Troughton, Nate. Are you part of it? No? Okay. Who am I missing then? I don't want to leave anyone out.
Well, let me just click on the Slack
Oh.
channel and I can tell you.
Chris Staw, yeah.
Chris Dog, Caleb Coy,
Oh,
Rich
Chris Dog.
Troughton. Yep.
Yeah. And yeah, that's an amazing group. And it is interesting that, like all of those people, like many other faces I see on this call, I started off this call, Charles mentioning that like we met at Macworld, which has been gone for years and years and years, and we're all sort of like coming to the realization of our own mortality to a bit. Like we're the old guard, and there is older guard, but we are sort of like the old guard, and I think we love what we do so much. We're trying to figure out like who's the new guard, like how can we pass this along, how can we help people into the industry, and like that's a thoughtful motivation to begin with. So like I'm incredibly excited that like this is a thing and this is being done. So I can't think of people in the community better to take charge of that.
Yeah, they are. It's a great group of people, and a great mission. And I mean, who would have thought? I mean, those of us who are on the I think I lurked on the IRC, but I never really got. I responded to a couple things on the IRC, and then it led to things, and I was like, I don't need this drama in my life, so I never really commented out there. And the same is true to a large extent with Slack as well. I just watch, and I would say that's where a decent number of our guests for the MacAdmins podcast comes from. But whoever would have thought that there'd be this many people in that community? I mean, and that the community would be able to support companies like Jamf, Jump Cloud, Kanji, etc. I mean, who was it that just got another $100+ million Mosel? There's all these companies, and investors aren't deploying that kind of capital because they see a contracting market. I mean, that's those.
Well, I think Apple has put more of a fine point on it that you need this to manage your devices, and guess what? More and more of your workforce is working from home now and remote, and you need these tools. Like absolutely 100% need these tools. Yeah, and speaking of which, I think I wanted to touch on some of the announcements from WDC before we wrap up, and that was one of them that sort of like there were a lot of great announcements as usual, but there's one that a lot of us are kind of struggling through, and that's the ability for end users just to turn off any agents that you have with sort of no question and almost no recourse. I mean, sure, it's beta 1.
How about this? Have a system extension. Have an extension that invokes your agent back. I mean, there's ways around that. I'm not.
There are ways around it, but it was just sort of like
it does create technical debt for those of us who have to write the ways around it, but there are ways around it. So.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily worried. I'm not terrified about it, because for me, I still want to base authentication on a machine's posture, right? So now we're giving the foot gun to our end users, and if they shoot themselves in the foot, well, okay, sorry, you have to remediate and get back in.
Yeah, I can confirm that if I disable everything on my work laptop, I lose every access almost immediately. So it's fine.
Right.
Like it turns into a nothing machine, but it'd be nice to be able to stop users or prevent users from doing that unless they really want to.
Yeah, I totally agree. But I think, some of those things they're a little bit buried. They're a little out of the way. Like someone really has to go looking for them. My, my fear is always, there's some internal mailing list or Slack channel or something where some developer says like, "Oh man, you can speed up your builds if you just go shut all these things off." Like, "Oh no," or like there's always this sort of like cargo cult advice of like, "Hey, zap the PRAM," or like, "Rebuild your desktop, it solves everything." And I've definitely seen that with help desks over the years, and my current battle with a help desk is they seem to run sudo profiles renew for everything, no matter what the problem is. Like,
And that's rate limited now.
yeah, I know. So like, like, "Oh, hey Ed, Santa was blocking this thing on a machine. I ran sudo profiles renew." I'm like, "Why? Why would you do that?" Like, that's not. But like, that has become where I am. That has become the new. Hey, like, rebuild the desktop. So, um, I think there are these cargo culty things, and that could easily become one of them in a company. Like, "Oh, hey, yeah, just go switch off this thing. It solves all your problems." So,
We could
I would,
talk for hours on troubleshooting methodologies.
yeah, yeah,
Because it does feel like, I mean, I'm sure Peter Borg is stoked that he finally got Sherlocked. He's like, how did this take so long? you know, because we don't need those tools anymore.
yeah,
Yeah, I feel like every era requires like a new type of troubleshooting, and so if you actually wanted to remove an agent, if you made it where you had to delete the app to unload the extension, um, then that would be smart, I guess.
yeah.
But
Well, I mean, they've been moving this direction with system extensions, right? The system extensions get bundled into an app bundle and get launched from there. And, you make the system aware of it, loads, does all the right things. You throw away the application, you throw away the extension, like nice and neat. Um, so I think this is a good move. I guess I missed if launch agents and daemons are now dead in Mac OS 13 in the traditional way, because if they are, that's going to bite a lot of vendors, right? Like that
I
is
mean, I
just
made one and it worked.
okay.
Some vendors might have to change. To answer Eric's question, Peter wrote Lingon.
Yes.
And so I'm sure he's been sick of Lingon for a long time and is ready to not work on it anymore.
That's
But
an old goody.
yeah, exactly. But it doesn't even do everything Lingon did, or does, because it's not gone yet. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure it will introduce breaking changes to some tools, and then they'll just have to release an update and it'll fix it. But
Yeah, but
how many tools have one agent though? Like if I look at Monkey, there's 4 or 5 binaries running in the background. Most tools don't just have one agent or one daemon. There's daemons to control all the daemons, and that's just kind of an object-oriented network socket philosophy, right? Resiliency. So
Even with system extensions, you can't just rely on the system extension. You really need something outside of it to watch it.
yeah, but we can load the extension from an app, and as long as the app's there, you can kind of force it to start every time. So that's it does harken back to the days of your MCX book, Ed, of how to deploy these things from there. So
someone mentioned that to me the other day, and I said like, MCX was great. It worked. I loved MCX.
You must have.
It worked really well, and you could sort of like bend it to your will. So let's wrap this up on a positive note. What did you like? Oh, lovely. Eric always has all the books at his fingertips. What did you like the most from WDC? What are you most excited about? What what was super cool from WDC?
Two things. The YAML for profiles. I think there's a lot we can do with that, from a consuming tools and parsing data and getting it into other tools. And then I just love seeing the people that do the thing talk about the thing. That to me is just so heartwarming. Like, they're sometimes passionate, and it feels a little scripted every now and then, but Apple has an image to uphold, and so I'm sure that they give a lot of coaching. And I've seen some social media posts from people like where it was like the crowning achievement of their career to be on stage at a WWDC, and that is just glorious, like.
Yes, I totally agree. And I have to say,
how about you?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the platform SSO announcement was like really exciting. I want to see these IDPs start releasing SSO extensions. I think that's really cool. Yeah, I go in for like sort of the cheesy, like low hanging fruit sometimes. Like, I upgraded my test iPhone with iOS 16. Immediately I'm like, let me create a cool home screen, right? Like, it's the stupidest thing, but it just makes you feel like I just got a whole new device, like that's fun.
I do love that aspect of Apple devices. Every year feels like, or at least for those of us who are nerds about the whole thing, So.
Yes. And yes, Clay, even if these are things that Android has had for forever, yes. I agree. Like there are a lot. I actually have some friends at Apple, and like they ask me all the time, like about using Android, and I'm like, I've been back on an iPhone for years now, but they still think of me as an Android user. But I'll always tell like Apple people, like there are a lot of things Android gets really right. Like I feel like I can move through the OS so fast. Android has always had notifications like
I feel like
years ahead of iOS.
Yeah.
And like widgets on the home screen, like years and years ago, and like Apple's just sort of getting there. Like
kind of widgets.
Kind of like
I watch these announcements sometimes, and I think that's been on Android for a long time. That's something new. I had no idea.
And the consumer benefits. Yeah, the consumer benefits because the ideas are flowing in both directions, because you can't really patent widgets, right? You can copyright the code you use to make them, but not, and it's open source anyways. So, but yeah, I feel like the consumer in a healthy market where there are multiple vendors playing, wins, because the ideas are flowing back and forth. And that's probably my favorite thing about the M series and A series chips is, with the advent of ARM, it's like, it did feel like we were getting into this place where computers weren't moving as fast as they should anymore, right around the time that that Apple embraced the Intel, Yeah. And now there's like a super healthy ecosystem of different companies, whether it's Broadcom, who buys every company under the sun, or some other company, the foundries and the design companies making the CPUs. So
yeah, the M series is incredibly exciting. It's rare we get to see like a sort of like a genuinely new thing in computer science, and the M1 was just amazing, and now here comes the M2 sort of building on that. And yeah, I'm super excited. I'm a little disappointed that the 2013 trash can Mac Pro is now out of the running for new OSs. But that was the one thing with Ventura, is it hit a lot of older machines. Again, this is another place where Apple's like, yep, done. Like, here's the cutoff line.
Yeah, you got to sometimes.
Yeah.
The question is it Ventura or Ventura?
You're right. If you live in LA, it's Ventura.
I'm just disappointed we didn't get the annual weed joke. You know, every year, like we looked around and it was going to be California weed.
That joke again. Yeah, tracksuit Federighi, I think, is going to have to be, you know.
I love that they're leaning into it. I love they're leaning into that and the hairstyle. I think it's kind of funny. But we were talking about WDC, and I think I like this format better, to be honest. Like I love the idea of just, you know, sessions are as long as they need to be. You have transcripts, you can go search everything. Like that's fantastic. I do miss some in-person aspects of it, but I think watching these videos on my own, or maybe with a group, whatever, but watching them that way is so much better than sitting in an auditorium. And I don't say that very often for conferences, but for WDC, I really like this so much better. And if they ever move to like an in-person thing again, I hope they keep sort of like a hybrid ability where you can get these videos and they have, like, I know they were releasing videos before, but I don't think they were up to like all the transcripts and things. And I do like the, I don't know if I want to call it rehearsed nature of them, but I do like the polished nature of them. I like that a lot. You know, it gives people, you know, an opportunity to kind of do their best. You know, I was talking to someone about recording a video for a conference that they're, I was going to say speaking at, but pre-recording a video for. And like Max Sysadmin, I've really enjoyed that process, and there's no pressure on me to get it right. You know, I do a bunch of takes and I screw up, let me just do that again. And then I come into Final Cut and I piece it all together, and it's this thing that I'm happy with, rather than like coming along later and like getting off stage, right? And there are always the things you get off stage and you're like, oh, I meant to say this thing, or like,
and this thing, and this thing.
Yeah, or I screwed that up, and I should tell people, like, whatever. But like, which is still, that's a different performance, and I can't wait to get back to that for a number of other reasons. But recording the video is like super fun. So I don't know.
Some people hate it. I enjoy it as well.
Yeah.
Poor Eric. I was at that session.
Yeah. Cool. So I usually wrap this up talking about conferences. You mentioned Objective by the Sea earlier, and a talk. Is that your talk? Are you speaking at Objective?
No, I'm not giving that talk. I can't remember exactly who it is, but that's something I've spent a lot of time poking around at, and I feel like the marketing literature doesn't exactly match the what actually happens in the secure enclave. But and the same with a UBI token, or a YubiKey. You know, but yeah, Objective by the Sea. That's in what, October?
It's fortunately or unfortunately, I don't know, it depends how you look at it. It's the same week as Max Sysadmin. Now, Max Sysadmin is purely virtual. Objective by the Sea is going to be in person and have a live stream. So there'll be a lot going on that week.
And both happen in Europe. That's the thing.
Right. And both are happening sort of like roughly in that time zone. So Objective by the Sea is Spain, Barcelona area.
Yeah. I think it's like 10 minutes from Barcelona, from the beach.
Right. So, yeah, interesting timing. Are you attending any conferences? Anything coming up that you're speaking at or involved in?
I will be giving Patrick a session for Max Sysadmin. That is the only thing. Like I said, I've tried to keep my calendar super empty. I've been heads down writing code 12 hours a day or editing. You know, it's been a busy year. So
yeah, totally get it, because it's an investment of time to put together a conference talk, either live or recorded. It's a lot of work. So
can be, that's for sure. And I always want to say something new. I've never given the same talk twice. And so I do feel like if I gave the same talk at 4 conferences in sequence, then, third time's you're all polished. You're like Craig Federighi style, who helped write core data. I mean, he's, an old school, he's earned swagger to some degree.
And I guess in 2-3 days we have Mac DevOps.
It's starting tomorrow.
Oh, it's starting tomorrow. Okay. Well, there you go. We should all hop on that. And you're keynoting, Eric? Are you keynoting at that? Excellent. Well, tomorrow morning. I will go have a look for that.
The keynote is on Thursday.
Thursday, yeah.
But keynote is
okay. Good. I've definitely slipped. There was also a conference this past weekend, a security conference in New York that I had been kind of looking forward to, and then I just blew it and forgot about it. And all the tweets are coming out like, "Hey, we're starting today." I was like, "Oh, that was this weekend." Like, whoops. So yeah, I definitely feel you on the sort of being busy front and maybe not having time for.
And I would plug DEF CON, being able to watch some of their sessions, because there's going to be some more Apple sessions at the end of July, early August, and some really interesting security research there.
Yeah, it is really interesting that the Objective by the Sea is really like the only Mac specifically or Apple specifically focused security conference, but it's always the Apple talks that set everyone on fire at any security conference. Like if you have something to say about Apple, and like even I know when I was at Duo, we'd have these blog posts of these different things, but if you had one on Apple and like the T2 chip, like that was just like traffic, continual traffic. Like once we put that up, like the serial number with DEP or whatever Apple's calling it now, like, hey, did you know you can just like get a bunch of random strings and throw them into serial numbers and get on someone else's DEP?
I now have your Wi-Fi password.
So like, but the Apple ones that really like fire up people. So yeah, I'm sure at DEF CON, like if there's anything on Apple, like people are just into it. So
yeah, I know I am,
Yeah, well, we are, but I mean, like security people in general. And I think security people just have this thing with Apple where Apple like has this marketing angle of like security and privacy. And like, as soon as you start saying that, people are coming after you, right? Like that's just, if you have secure in your name, like people are coming after you.
Challenge accepted.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. When I spoke at DEF CON, I don't know. I can't tell you how many attempts to bring down cryptid there were, to where I just took it down myself for a few days. Like, I just put up we'll be back in a few, because the amount of traffic was just insane.
But you took their toy away.
Yeah.
Right.
At DEF CON though, everyone trying to one up everyone else, and
Yeah, I mean, I do like it's gotten a little more semi-professional, and of course there's Black Hat if you're actually professional, right? But I do feel like you go to a DEF CON and it's a lot of security researchers. Like one of the Mac talks from last year, which was really a survey of tools more than anything. He was a security researcher at a big tech shop in the Valley, basically publishing, here's what I did for the last 6 months at my day job.
Well, great when you get to talk about, your work to a public audience, to a non-work audience.
Yeah. Even if you're not allowed to say your company name.
Yeah. That's interesting, because usually that's the point of giving some of these talks, is to have that virtuous cycle of like, hey, here's what I do at work, and oh, by the way, we're releasing that, and then that increases interest in your company and your marketing department maybe gets, a blog post out of it and some interest, and then that's good for recruiting, and those people come on and want to do that work and talk about it, and like hopefully it's just this nice cycle. But if you can't,
as Eric could tell you, as far back as when he helped select the speakers for Macworld, like some people just can't put their, some marketing departments are begrudgingly allow people to go speak at conferences as opposed to use it as a marketing asset,
Large animation studio.
Right. We've all been there.
Yeah. I mean, which is fine. I'm just talking about sort of like the normal case is like, these talks are like, they're beneficial across multiple axes. So, well, Charles, it was excellent catching up with you. Again, I haven't seen you in person in a while. I might be out in Minnesota in January, which is, I know, like, why would you come to Minnesota in January? But it is to be in the cold and see all the interesting cold stuff. So if I am out that way, I will definitely ping you and say hi.
That is the coldest month.
Yeah, so. That's what I'm looking for. That's what I'm looking for. Most people
ice castles.
Yes, that's one of the things that we want to see.
There's one close to my house.
Awesome.
You wouldn't want to walk there from here. You might die on the way.
Yeah. So I hear, and frozen eyebrows and mustaches and things like that. But that's why we do it. All right. Thanks again so much. I wish I was seeing you in person at Mac Sysadmin, but I'll look for your
next
video.
time.
Yeah. I'm really hoping, fingers crossed, that sort of next year we are all back in person at these different events. Fingers crossed. I think we're actually close this time.
Whenever the scientists tell me I am, I'll believe them.
Exactly. So, be the experts.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for having me.